Hello. I have found 13 roguelite/roguelike games that you probably haven't heard of that looks interesting. So let's take a look at the games. First up is Netherworld Covenant, a dark fantasy action roguelike with what looks like very high skill combat. The character you're playing has the ethereal torch, a forbidden artifact bridging the mortal realm and the netherworld. That sounds really cool. The combat has a lot of flexibility with you being able to parry, dodge, dash, counter. The gameplay looks pretty fast, and it also looks like you're gaining a lot of perks as you play. You have spells from what it looks like, and several currencies. The bosses looks a bit boring and easy, but hopefully they get some more polish before release. The game also has a companion system, granting you a spectral ally in the form of a swordsman, ranger, guardian, or rogue, so you won't be completely alone. Release is planned for Q2 this year. Then we have Terminal Brigade, a third-person action roguelike. There seems to be 6 characters available at launch. The game can also be played in co-op. Each character has a primary, secondary, and an ultimate attack. And then there is also a buff as well for each character. There is supposedly different builds for each character, and you do choose something called quirks in the trailer that changes your attacks. And the game's story revolves around freeing enslaved digital worlds, so hopefully some interesting environments and locations. I do think the game looks flashy and cool, so hopefully it is as fun to play as well. Set to release this year, there is no specific date for it yet. Then we have Grit and Valor 1949. This one is set in an alternate World War II timeline, and you are put in control of an elite mech squadron. The game is played on small maps where you attack objectives and defend against waves of enemies. Outside of combat, you have your base where you can upgrade and rebuild your squad. I think tactical gameplay on small maps is kinda cool. Reminds me of the old Final Fantasy Tactics games, only this one is a bit more gritty, and it has mechs. Who doesn't love mechs? Looks great, release is planned for 26th of March. Next up is Lethal Honor, Order of the Apocalypse. Kind of an interesting style to this one, trying to mirror an 80s superhero graphical novel. The game is played in an isometric view, and I think the structure of the game is going to be a bit like Hades, with rooms you clear in order to get rewards and progress. The gameplay seems fast and will require some skill from what it looks like. On top of that, you have unique abilities, artifacts, and enchantments in order to mold your character into the playstyle you want to play. Looks pretty badass. Release is planned for this year, no exact date yet. Next up is Nine Kings. This is a kingdom builder in a roguelite formula. The game starts off very small with what looks like 9 squares to build your kingdom on. This will expand a bit as you get further into the game. You will also start to raise your army in order to attack other kingdoms and defend your own. Everything is built via cards, and there are a ton of these in the game for thousands of different combinations of buildings, troops, spells, and how they should be positioned. A very small and cute game that I think could deliver a ton of fun. Release is planned for April, no exact date. Blightstone is a turn-based roguelike set in a dark fantasy world. Blightstone doesn't have a grid-based combat, instead you can move freely. I would guess you have a meter for it or something. The environment in the game is also interactive, so I think the fights in the game could be kind of interesting. Resource management is also a big part of the game. Each run is procedurally generated, so maps will vary, and the combat seems to have a lot of flexibility with melee range, area of effect, powerful skills, interruptions, traps, summons, and much more. It all sounds very promising to me. Release is planned for this year, no exact date yet. Then we have Blood Rush, a fast-paced FPS with roguelite elements. The inspiration for the game is Hades and Ultra Kill, both well worth striving for, and there seems to be a nice mix between magic and guns, with you holding all the guns in one hand and using spells with the other. The game's overall formula seems pretty standard, with new weapons to find, abilities, relics, idols, and spells. Looks very fast-paced and interesting. The game will enter early access sometime this year and will stay in early access for about 12 to 18 months. I do think there is potential in this one, and I kinda like the old school aesthetics of the game. Then we have Dead Weight, a steampunk roguelite taking place in the sky where you travel to different islands searching for loot. The combat in the game is turn-based. There are 15 classes, all with their own skill tree, and then on top of that you can multi-class for even more flexibility as you upgrade your ship and crew to take on harder and harder challenges, with mighty creatures awakening from their slumber. I do like turn-based combat, and the style of this one is pretty cool. Release is planned for Q2 this year. Next up is Conquest Dark, an action RPG roguelite survivor where the Black Planet has arrived and you now stand between it and the annihilation of humanity. The game doesn't really seem to push the genre forward, but it do look like a good time with several classes, weapons, abilities, armors. It does look like there is going to be some build potential in the game. Hopefully it's a solid build and scratches that survival roguelite itch. It will enter early access sometime Q1 this year and will stay in early access for about a year. Up next is Duchy. I've mentioned this game before on this channel, and it's kind of an interesting puzzle game with roguelite elements, some deck building, and a bit of Tetris thrown in there as well. So in the game, you basically drop blocks on a board in order to gain resources, build up your army, and also placing buildings on the board and trying to place them in the right spot for maximum gains. The card building mechanic of the game comes in with the buildings and units. The game really tries to do a lot here, and I kind of like all the aspects. I just hope it's not too much or too convoluted, because the game do look very interesting. Release is planned for 5th of May. Then we have Vaders, a fusion between the deck building and grid-based tactics in a roguelite formula. You are piloting a mech and are trying to defend Earth from invading aliens. I like the quirky nature of the game and the interesting gameplay it provides. Each pilot brings their own mechanics to the fight, also their own deck. But there are of course a ton of cards in the game, 240. So there will surely be ways to get cards. And on top of that you have 120 artifacts that will change the gameplay as well. Looks very interesting that you kind of have to be at the bottom of the grid and defend the enemies that come from above. I wonder how much tactical depth there is in the game. Release is planned for Q2 this year. Then we have Arctide, a survival FPS with roguelite elements, set in the harsh environment of the near-future Arctic. A calamity have devastated the lands and you're trying to survive with limited resources, weapons and equipment that have limited durability, so repairing is key. The levels are procedurally generated with a day and night cycle, and the mercs and inhuman horrors are everywhere, so you'll have to scavenge for weapons, attachments, consumables, and manage hunger and stamina in order to survive. I like what the game is trying to do. The style is also kind of interesting. I hope it's engaging enough and not too empty. Release is planned for 2025, no exact date yet. Next up is Cleanfall, a survival roguelite with a pretty creepy setting and monsters. The game is all about exploring the depths of a planet, building elaborate death machines and defenses as the dark is filled with creatures and horrors. I love the design of the monsters, they are very creepy. The building aspect of the game is also interesting, adding another layer to the experience. The world is also procedurally generated with tons of items to find, buy or craft. There are perks to gain and resources to harvest. Could be pretty interesting. Release is planned for Q2 this year. These were the upcoming roguelite and roguelike games I found that you probably haven't heard of. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more indie game recommendations, check out this video.